Steve Harvey had witnessed countless family dynamics during his 12 years hosting Family Feud. He had seen siblings bicker playfully, parents beam with pride at their children's accomplishments, and families celebrate victories together with genuine joy. However, nothing in his extensive experience could have prepared him for the moment when a contestant's cruelty toward their own sick family member would bring the entire production to a complete standstill. What unfolded on that November afternoon in 2024 would become one of the most uncomfortable and ultimately transformative moments in the show's history, proving that sometimes the most important lessons come from witnessing behavior so shocking that it demands immediate correction. Before we explore this powerful story about family, respect, and the consequences of cruelty, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Stories like this remind us why treating our family members with dignity matters, especially when they are most vulnerable. The Berkshire family from Portland, Oregon had advanced through the preliminary rounds and now stood on the Family Feud stage for their chance at the fast money round. The family consisted of 5 members, but the dynamic was immediately apparent to anyone paying attention. Richard Birkshere was 37 years old, dressed in expensive casual wear with an attitude that suggested someone accustomed to being the center of attention. He worked as a commercial real estate broker and carried himself with the kind of confidence that bordered on arrogance. Standing beside him was his younger sister, Margaret Birkshere, who was 32 years old and worked as a nurse at a local hospital. The contrast between the siblings was striking. Where Richard exuded brash confidence, Margaret appeared thoughtful and composed, with the kind of patient demeanor that suggested years of dealing with difficult situations. The third family member was their mother, Dorothy Berkshire, who was 68 years old and had been battling stage 4 pancreatic cancer for the past 14 months. She wore a beautiful floral scarf wrapped around her head, covering the hair loss from her recent chemotherapy treatments. Despite her illness, Dorothy had insisted on participating in the Family Feud taping, telling her children that creating happy memories was more important than staying home feeling sick. She moved slowly and carefully, clearly experiencing pain, but her eyes sparkled with determination and the desire to be present for this special family moment. The remaining 2 family members were Richard's wife, Amanda, and Margaret's husband, Thomas, both of whom seemed somewhat uncomfortable with the family dynamics they were observing. What the audience and production crew did not initially understand was the deep tension that existed within the Berkshire family. Richard had always been the favored child, receiving preferential treatment from their father before his death 5 years earlier. He had been given financial support for his business ventures, expensive gifts, and constant praise, while Margaret had worked her way through nursing school with minimal family assistance. When their mother Dorothy was diagnosed with cancer, the family dynamic had shifted in ways that Richard found deeply threatening. Dorothy had come to depend heavily on Margaret, who used her nursing skills and compassionate nature to help manage her mother's care. Margaret had reduced her work hours to accompany Dorothy to chemotherapy appointments, had researched treatment options extensively, and had essentially become Dorothy's primary caregiver. This shift in their mother's attention and affection toward Margaret had caused Richard to become increasingly resentful. Over the past year, Richard had made numerous comments suggesting that Dorothy was exaggerating her symptoms to gain sympathy, that the cancer treatments were unnecessary and expensive, and that Margaret was encouraging their mother's dependence to make herself feel important. These comments had caused significant family conflict, with Margaret defending their mother's dignity and Richard becoming increasingly hostile. The Family Feud appearance had been Dorothy's idea. She had applied for the show months earlier, before her cancer diagnosis, and when they were finally selected, she had begged her children to participate despite her declining health. She wanted one last happy family memory, something joyful to focus on during her difficult treatments. Margaret had supported the idea immediately, seeing it as a chance to give their mother something positive. Richard had initially refused, claiming he was too busy with work, but had eventually agreed after Dorothy made it clear how much it meant to her. The family had performed reasonably well during the main game, with Margaret and Dorothy answering several questions correctly while Richard had missed 2 obvious answers, clearly not fully engaged in the process. They had won their match and now stood ready for the fast money round. Steve Harvey asked which family member would go first, and Richard immediately volunteered, stepping up to the podium before anyone else could respond. Dorothy had smiled at her son, clearly hoping that his participation meant he was finally embracing the family experience. Margaret had exchanged a concerned glance with her husband Thomas, recognizing the controlling behavior that Richard often displayed. Richard completed his fast money round with a score of 141 points. It was a solid performance, and he returned to his family with a self-satisfied expression, making a point of saying loudly enough for the microphones to pick up that he had done his part and now someone else could finish the job. Steve Harvey then asked who would take the second turn, and there was a brief moment of silence. Dorothy slowly raised her hand, her voice weak but determined as she said she would like to try. The audience had erupted in supportive applause, clearly moved by the elderly woman's courage in wanting to participate despite her obvious illness. Margaret had stepped forward to help her mother walk to the podium, supporting her arm gently as Dorothy moved slowly across the stage. It was at this moment that Richard's behavior shifted from merely self-centered to genuinely shocking. As Dorothy reached the podium and Steve Harvey was preparing to put the headphones on her for the fast money round, Richard spoke loudly from where he stood with the rest of the family. His words were clearly audible to everyone in the studio. "Mom, try not to take forever with your answers. We know you move slow these days, but the clock does not stop just because you are sick." The entire studio fell silent. The audience members looked at each other in disbelief. Steve Harvey's expression froze, his hand still holding the headphones he had been about to place on Dorothy's head. Margaret's face showed a mixture of shock and fury. Dorothy herself seemed to shrink slightly, her shoulders sagging as the cruelty of her son's words registered. Steve Harvey slowly lowered the headphones and turned to face Richard directly. The usual warmth and humor in his expression had been replaced by something much more serious. Richard appeared oblivious to the shift in atmosphere, seemingly pleased with his own comment, which he apparently thought was humorous. Steve's voice when he spoke was measured but carried an unmistakable edge of controlled anger. "Richard, did you really just say that to your mother?" Richard, still not comprehending the magnitude of his mistake, responded with casual dismissiveness. "What? I was just being honest. She does move slow. It is not like it is a secret. She knows she has cancer. I'm just saying we do not have all day for her to stand there thinking about every answer." The audience reaction was immediate and visceral. Several people gasped audibly, others made sounds of disgust. A woman in the front row stood up and shouted, "That is your mother!" Steve Harvey held up his hand to quiet the audience, but his focus remained entirely on Richard. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Steve said, his voice deceptively calm. "Your mother, who is battling stage 4 cancer, who has been through chemotherapy that has clearly taken a physical toll on her, wanted to participate in this game show to create a happy memory with her family. And your response to her wanting to take her turn at the podium is to mock her for moving slowly because of her illness. Is that what just happened here?" Richard's confident expression finally began to falter as he realized that the reaction he was receiving was not what he had expected. He attempted to backtrack. "Steve, you are taking it the wrong way. I was not mocking her. I was just making a comment. We have always had that kind of relationship where we joke around. She knows I did not mean anything by it." Steve Harvey's response was swift and unequivocal. "No, Richard, that was not a joke. That was cruelty. And the fact that you think it was acceptable to speak to your sick mother that way tells me everything I need to know about the kind of person you are." The camera cut to Dorothy, who stood at the podium with tears now streaming down her face, her hand pressed against her chest, as though trying to physically hold herself together. Margaret had moved toward her mother, abandoning her position with the family to stand beside Dorothy, placing a protective arm around her shoulders. Steve Harvey made a decision in that moment that would later be described as one of the most powerful interventions in game show history. He turned away from Richard and walked over to Dorothy, speaking to her with genuine gentleness. "Mrs. Berkshire, I need you to listen to me very carefully. What your son just said to you was wrong. It was disrespectful, it was cruel, and you did not deserve it. You have every right to take all the time you need to answer these questions. You have every right to be here on this stage, creating the memory you wanted to create. And anyone who cannot treat you with the basic dignity and respect you deserve, especially during one of the most difficult battles of your life, does not deserve to be here with you." Dorothy looked up at Steve, her tears still flowing, and spoke in a trembling voice. "He has always been like this, Mr. Harvey. Even before I got sick, Richard never had patience for anything that was not about him. But since my diagnosis, it has gotten worse. He acts like my cancer is an inconvenience to him, like I chose to get sick just to make his life difficult." Steve's expression reflected both anger at Richard's behavior and compassion for Dorothy's pain. "Mrs. Berkshire, with your permission, I would like to do something we have never done on this show before. I would like to remove Richard from the stage and have your daughter Margaret stand in for the family during your fast money round. You deserve to have someone beside you who actually supports and loves you, not someone who treats your illness as an annoyance. The audience erupted in applause at Steve's suggestion. Dorothy looked at Margaret, who nodded encouragingly, then back at Steve. She spoke softly but with surprising firmness. "Yes, Mr. Harvey, I would like that very much." Richard, still standing off to the side, finally seemed to recognize the seriousness of the situation. "Wait, Steve, you cannot just kick me off the stage. This is my family. We won this together." Steve turned to face Richard with an expression of complete disdain. "Richard, you stopped acting like family the moment you mocked your sick mother on national television. You can watch from backstage, or you can leave the studio entirely, but you will not be standing here while your mother takes her turn. Security will escort you if necessary." Richard looked around as though expecting someone to defend him, but his wife Amanda simply shook her head and looked away, clearly embarrassed by his behavior. The other family members remained silent. Finally, Richard walked off the stage on his own, his face flushed with humiliation and anger. The audience applauded his departure. Once Richard had exited, Steve turned his full attention back to Dorothy. "Now, Mrs. Berkshire, let us do this the right way. You take all the time you need. There is no rush. This is your moment, and you have earned the right to enjoy it." Margaret stood beside her mother at the podium, holding her hand supportively. Steve began the fast money questions, and what happened next demonstrated the profound impact of being treated with dignity and respect. Dorothy, freed from her son's cruelty and surrounded by genuine support, answered each question with remarkable clarity and speed. Her answers were thoughtful and accurate. She did not hesitate or struggle. In fact, she performed significantly better than Richard had, her answers hitting #1 responses on 3 out of 5 questions. When the final scores were revealed, Dorothy had scored 168 points on her own, bringing the family total to 309 points. The audience gave her a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Steve Harvey embraced Dorothy gently, mindful of her fragile condition, and spoke to her and the cameras with evident emotion. "Mrs. Berkshire, you just showed everyone watching something incredibly important. You showed us that illness does not diminish a person's worth or capabilities. You showed us that when we are treated with respect and support instead of mockery and impatience, we can accomplish remarkable things. And you showed your son, who I hope is watching from backstage, what he missed out on by choosing cruelty over compassion." Dorothy wiped her tears and smiled, the first genuine smile she had displayed since arriving at the studio. "Thank you, Mr. Harvey. Thank you for standing up for me when my own son would not. This meant more to me than you could possibly know." Margaret spoke up, her voice thick with emotion. "Mr. Harvey, my mother has faced her cancer diagnosis with more courage and grace than anyone I have ever known. She has endured painful treatments, terrifying medical procedures, and the uncertainty of not knowing how much time she has left. Through all of it, she has remained kind, thoughtful, and concerned about everyone else's well-being. She deserved to have this moment of joy without being made to feel like a burden. What you did today, removing Richard and letting our mother play with dignity, that was one of the most compassionate things I have ever witnessed." Steve addressed the cameras directly with a message that would be replayed millions of times in the days and weeks following the episode's airing. "I want to talk to everyone watching this show, especially those of you who have family members dealing with serious illness. Your loved ones who are sick did not choose to be sick. They did not ask for their bodies to betray them. They did not request the pain, the treatments, the limitations that illness brings. What they need from their family is patience, compassion, support, and above all, basic human dignity. If you cannot provide those things, if you find yourself treating someone's illness as an inconvenience to you rather than a tragedy for them, then you need to take a hard look at yourself and make some serious changes." He continued speaking, his words growing more passionate. "And to anyone who has been treated the way Mrs. Berkshire was treated by her son today, who has been mocked or belittled or made to feel like a burden because of illness or disability or simply because you need help, I want you to know something. You are not a burden. You are a human being deserving of respect. Anyone who cannot see that, anyone who treats your struggles as an annoyance, does not deserve a place in your life. Surround yourself with people like Margaret, people who show up with love and support, not people like Richard who show up with resentment and cruelty." The episode aired 3 weeks later and immediately became one of the most talked about moments in television history. The clip of Steve Harvey removing Richard from the stage and defending Dorothy went viral across all social media platforms, generating tens of millions of views within the first 48 hours. The response was overwhelmingly supportive of Steve's intervention and deeply critical of Richard's behavior. Mental health professionals and elder care advocates praised the episode for highlighting the often overlooked issue of how chronically ill family members are sometimes mistreated by their own relatives. Medical ethicists wrote articles about the importance of maintaining dignity for patients, particularly those facing terminal diagnoses. Cancer support organizations used the episode as a teaching moment about the psychological impact of caregiving stress and the need for families to seek support services rather than allowing resentment to build toward sick family members. Richard himself faced immediate and severe consequences for his behavior. His real estate firm received thousands of angry phone calls and emails from people expressing disgust at his treatment of his mother. Several major clients terminated their contracts with him, explicitly citing his behavior on Family Feud as their reason. His wife Amanda filed for divorce 2 weeks after the episode aired, stating in her filing that Richard's treatment of Dorothy had made her realize she could no longer remain married to someone capable of such cruelty. Richard issued several public apologies, but they were widely viewed as insincere damage control rather than genuine remorse. Dorothy, meanwhile, received an outpouring of support from around the world. Cancer patients and their families sent thousands of letters and messages sharing their own stories and expressing admiration for her courage. Several cancer treatment centers invited her to speak to their patient groups about maintaining dignity during illness. A major pharmaceutical company working on pancreatic cancer treatments reached out to offer her access to an experimental therapy trial that showed promising results. Most significantly, the $20,000 the family won on Family Feud went entirely to Dorothy, with Steve Harvey personally ensuring that Richard had no access to the funds. Dorothy used the money to pay for additional treatments and to create special experiences with Margaret and her grandchildren during the time she had remaining. Steve Harvey invited Dorothy and Margaret back to the show 6 months later for a follow-up segment. Dorothy's condition had stabilized somewhat due to the experimental treatment she had been able to access. While she remained seriously ill, her doctors were encouraged by her response to the therapy. More importantly, Dorothy spoke about the emotional healing that had occurred since the Family Feud episode. She had made the difficult decision to cut off contact with Richard entirely, recognizing that his presence in her life caused more harm than good. This decision had been painful but ultimately liberating, allowing her to focus her limited energy on relationships that brought her joy rather than stress. Margaret shared that she had been overwhelmed by the positive response to the episode and had started a blog about caregiving for family members with serious illness. The blog provided practical advice, emotional support, and resources for others navigating similar situations. She had also become an advocate for caregiver support services, working with several organizations to develop programs that helped families cope with the stress of long-term illness without allowing that stress to manifest as resentment toward the sick family member. During the follow-up segment, Steve Harvey revealed that his own foundation had been moved by Dorothy's story to create a new grant program specifically for families dealing with terminal illness. The program provided financial assistance for experimental treatments, respite care for family caregivers, and counseling services to help families navigate the emotional complexities of serious illness. The program was named the Dorothy Berkshire Dignity Fund, honoring her courage and the important conversation her story had sparked. Dorothy's response during the follow-up segment captured the profound impact the original episode had on her life. "Mr. Harvey, when I stood on your stage 6 months ago and my son mocked me for being sick, I felt a shame that went beyond words. For a moment, I thought he was right, that I was a burden, that my illness was making me less worthy of respect. But then you stepped in and reminded me that I am still a person deserving of dignity. You showed me that my worth is not determined by my health status or my ability to move quickly. You gave me permission to expect better treatment from the people in my life. That gift was worth more than any prize money could ever be." She continued with words that would be quoted extensively in articles about patient dignity and family caregiving. "I have learned that illness reveals character. It does not create cruelty where none existed before, but it strips away the polite facades we maintain and shows who people truly are. My son's response to my cancer showed me that his love was always conditional, always dependent on whether I was convenient for him. My daughter's response showed me unconditional love in its purest form. I am grateful for this clarity, painful as it was to achieve, because it has allowed me to spend my remaining time with people who genuinely care about me rather than wasting energy trying to earn love from someone incapable of giving it. Margaret added her own perspective on the lessons learned from their Family Feud experience. What happened on that stage was humiliating for my mother in the moment, but it ultimately liberated her. For years, she had made excuses for Richard's behavior, had minimized his cruelty, had tried to maintain family peace at the expense of her own emotional well-being. When Mr. Harvey called out Richard's behavior publicly and refused to tolerate it, it gave my mother permission to stop tolerating it as well. Sometimes we need someone outside our family system to validate what we already know deep down, that we deserve better treatment than we are receiving. Steve Harvey used the follow-up segment to deliver an additional message about family dynamics and the responsibility of adult children toward their aging or ill parents. He spoke directly to the camera with characteristic directness and conviction. If you are blessed enough to still have your parents alive, cherish them, support them, treat them with the respect they deserve, especially when they are vulnerable due to age or illness. Your parents spent years caring for you when you were helpless, feeding you, cleaning you, staying up all night when you were sick. The least you can do is show them basic kindness when they need your help. And if you find that you cannot do that, if you are so selfish that you view their needs as burdens, then at least have the decency to step aside and let people who actually care about them provide the support they need. 3 years after the original episode, Dorothy's story took a bittersweet turn. She passed away peacefully at home, surrounded by Margaret and her grandchildren, after her cancer ultimately progressed beyond what treatments could manage. However, the final years of her life had been marked by dignity, love, and the knowledge that she had sparked important conversations about how we treat our vulnerable family members. Her obituary mentioned her Family Feud appearance and the positive impact her story had on countless families dealing with similar dynamics. Richard was not present at his mother's funeral, having remained estranged from the family until Dorothy's death. In the years following the Family Feud incident, he had struggled professionally and personally, never fully recovering from the public backlash to his behavior. Some people viewed this as karma, while others saw it as a cautionary tale about the long-term consequences of cruelty toward those we claim to love. Margaret continued her advocacy work, and the blog she started had evolved into a comprehensive resource used by hospitals and hospice organizations around the country. She published a book titled Caregiving with Compassion, Lessons from My Mother's Journey, which became required reading in many nursing and social work programs. The book dedicated an entire chapter to the Family Feud episode and its aftermath, analyzing how public accountability had changed her family's dynamics and given her mother agency during a time when illness was stripping away so much of her independence. Steve Harvey himself reflected on Dorothy's story in numerous interviews over the years, consistently describing it as one of the most important moments of his career. He explained that the incident had fundamentally changed how he approached his role as host, making him more aware of the real human dynamics playing out behind the game show format. He had always cared about the families on his stage, but Dorothy's situation had taught him that sometimes caring meant intervention, even when that intervention made everyone uncomfortable. Before we conclude this powerful story about dignity, family, and standing up for what is right, please remember to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Dorothy's story reminds us that our treatment of vulnerable people reveals our true character. Your subscription helps us continue sharing these important stories that challenge us to be better family members and more compassionate human beings. Click the notification bell to ensure you never miss these transformative moments that teach us about courage, dignity, and the importance of defending those who cannot defend themselves. The story of Dorothy Berkshire and her Family Feud appearance transcended its origins as a shocking television moment to become a cultural touchstone about elder respect, patient dignity, and family responsibility. It sparked necessary conversations in living rooms across America about how we treat our aging and ill family members, whether we are providing care with compassion or resentment, and what we owe to the people who raised us when they become dependent on our support. Dorothy's courage in wanting to create a happy memory despite her illness, Steve Harvey's willingness to intervene when he witnessed cruelty, and Margaret's example of selfless caregiving all combined to create a teaching moment that reached millions of people and potentially changed how countless families approached illness and caregiving. The episode demonstrated that sometimes the most important role a television host can play is not entertainer but moral authority, someone willing to call out unacceptable behavior, even when it disrupts the carefully structured format of a game show. It showed that dignity is not something people lose when they become sick or dependent, but rather something that must be actively protected and defended by those around them. Most importantly, it reminded everyone who watched that how we treat our most vulnerable family members in their darkest hours reveals more about our character than any success or achievement ever could, and that true family is defined not by blood relations, but by who shows up with love, patience, and genuine support when it matters most.